of tzav, and this is one of the most dramatic and favorite, popular, what word shall I use, haftorahs that exist, because the haftorah comes to define for us one of the most difficult topics which exists in Chumash, and that is the problem of animal sacrifices. The avoda and the Beis Hamikdash of korbanos, of animal sacrifices, especially to later generations, was a very difficult concept to understand. And the Navi here speaks of its abuse during the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, where it became the substitute for all moral behavior. And the fact that one brought a sacrifice and was able to at least emotionally feel that he did his duty, so then he could go out and sin again. There's a psychological insight. I just saw an interesting article that people that go for a checkup by a doctor, and the doctor, thank God, gives them a clean bill of health. So there's a natural tendency to go out and eat junk food and everything else that caused the clean bill of health in celebration of the event, because, one feels that you beat the rat. There is the same psychological imperative here in korbanos. People bought the korban. It's like the post-Yom Kippur syndrome also. People feel that the tension is over, they've acquitted themselves, they've done everything they're supposed to, God has forgiven them, so they can go out and have a good time. The Navi addresses the psychological weaknesses that the korbanos engendered within the Jewish people. So he begins, the Navi Yirmiyahu, Ko Amar Hashem Tzvokos Alakei Yisrael Aloseichem Sfu Al Zivcheichem V'ichlu Bosor. The halacha is that there were two types of korbanos, really three types of korbanos. There was a korban olah, which was burned entirely and went on the altar. Nobody had any benefit from it. There was a korban shlomim, which the halacha was that the owner who brought it himself ate from the korban. And in many respects, that was the way that meat was eaten. At that time, they brought the korban. The entire family came up, and they had then the meal from the meat of the sacrifice. There was a third type of korban, which was a korban chatos, which was meant to be a forgiveness offering, and that was eaten by the Kohen. So the Navi starts out here with irony. He said, Oloseichem, so people thought, what is the best korban to bring to God, right? Because people treat God as though Kaviyachol he were human. He was subject to human failings. So the human failing is that you can bribe a person. We are all subject to bribery. We all like to be complimented, even if it's falsely. We all like to receive gifts, even if we're not deserving of it. So we think that Ravona Shalom is that way also. So if you bring the shalomim and the person himself eats from it, so you think that God is not too happy, right? Because you didn't give him anything. But if you bring a korban olah, if you bring a sacrifice that's entirely consumed on the altar and is given to God, so you think that you made an impression upon God. Because look at what you gave him. So the Navi begins sarcastically by saying, Oloseichem, your korban olos that you bring to God, Svu Al Zivcheichem, it would be better if you added it to the korban shlomim, V'ichlu Bosor, and you ate the meat. At least the meat would have a benefit, right? At least you ate it. Rather than to bring a korban olah in the contemplation that somehow you are deceiving God, that you're putting it over on him, that you are able to bribe him. And that's such a common human failing that the Chumash warns against it many times. The Chumash always says about God, Kilo Yikach Shochad, God does not take bribes. because people are convinced that they can bribe him. The Medrash says, shochad, they even shochad mitzvahs. You can't bribe God with a mitzvah either. And therefore, the only exception, so to speak, and it's not a bribe, but the only exception to this rule is in charity. A person, when he or she gives charity, can make a deal with God. Can say, here is money that my child may live. Here is money, I should be successful in this or that. So there, because the Novi there says, there God says you can test me. There it's open for negotiation. But another matter is the fact that a person does mitzvahs has nothing to do with the situation regarding the individual thing that he's doing now. So now the Novi says, the Jewish people misunderstood me. He said they didn't hear what I said. I never spoke to them about bringing sacrifices, that's the service of God. The service of God is in a person's heart. The service of God is in a person's attitude. The service of God is in how a person behaves towards God and towards man. The korbanos are a part of the service, but they are not the service of God. Unfortunately, point out that one of the terrible lessons that the Jewish people had to learn, and that to a great extent we did learn, is that we can get along without it. We've gotten along in our long history many more centuries without the temple than with the temple. The Jewish people had a Beis HaMikdash altogether for 850 years. Plus they had the Mishkan for another 400 years, so it was 1,200 years, 1,300 years. But we've been over 2,000 years without it. And therefore it is not central to the survival of the Jewish people. Whereas the observance of mitzvahs and the observance of a Jewish attitude towards life is central to the survival of the Jewish people and to the survival of each and every Jew and each and every Jewish family. So that's what God says. I never talked to your fathers about bringing korbanos. They didn't hear what I said. I spoke to them about morality. I spoke to them the divine revelation at Sinai. I spoke to them the Ten Commandments. That's what I spoke to them about. And they only heard korbanos, because people hear what they want to hear. We find numerous examples of that in the Chumash as well. God tells Bilam 50 times not to go, and then he says go. So Bilam said, oh, good, I'm glad you agreed, I can go. See, your children pull that on you all the time, right? I had a kid in the yeshiva once. So the Rebbe told him, he says, don't you dare leave. So the kid left. So then they called him in, they got ready to throw him out. He says, the Rebbe told me that if I dared, I could leave, right? So he dared him, he left. People do what they want to do. People hear what they want to hear. So we'll see in a moment, I hope the Rambam has a great example here that applies in every facet of life. So, again, you didn't hear me correctly. You thought that I was speaking to you about sacrifices. I was not speaking to you about sacrifices. I was speaking to you about the inner person. The sacrifices are a reflection of the service of God in the temple. And that's your error. Your error is that you took the symptom and you said that's the disease. You took the outward action and you said that that's really the internal attitude. That's the error. This is what I told them. So the Navi restates it. This is what I told them. Shimu B'Koli, listen to me. That's the first thing. We find that the Navi Shmuel said to Shaul, Halo Shmoa Mizevach Tov. Better to listen to God than bringing the best of sacrifices. Listen. Pay attention. Behave yourself. I am your God and you are my people. That's our relationship. I don't need anything from you. And you shall go on the road that I command you, to be a holy people, to be a special nation. And all of this is so that it will be your benefit. That's what I told them. I didn't tell them about sacrifices. I told them about being my people. There is an area that we are all deficient in, and that is that many times the form is so important to us that the substance escapes. You cannot have it without form. You cannot have a religion of ethics alone. That has been proven in the last 200 years. Judaism does not survive on that alone. Right? Ethical culture doesn't do it for us. There has to be observance of mitzvahs, and there has to be a form, and there has to be a structure and a discipline, but that is not the end. That's the means to the end. The end is the person. The end is the attitude. The end is the internal attitude that the person has. Rambam has a great example. The Rambam, you see it every Shabbos in shul, that our shul, I'm certain, like almost all other synagogues in the world, have men who distribute candy to children. They're all subsidized by the dentists in shul. And so there are children that come to shul to get the candy. That's the highlight of the morning prayer. And so they're only interested in the candy. The Rambam says, for instance, a child goes to school and the teacher gives candy. Or he goes to the synagogue and they give him honey. He describes there are sweets. We hope, he says, that by the time the child reaches an age of more maturity, he no longer goes for the candy. He sees what's behind the candy. But he says there are people who their whole lives only go for the candy. They never see behind the candy. They never see that there's anything behind that. So he says it's wonderful. They're still coming to shul, and they're still coming to learn, so that's good. But he said it's very sad because that's immature, and that misses the whole point. The whole point is that eventually one is supposed to outgrow the candy. That's the point that the Navi makes here. You didn't hear what I said. I said to you, I want to be your God, you should be my people. We want to develop a relationship that will be eternal and lasting, and you heard that I had, to bring that. More than that, you didn't hear. So again, you missed the point. But another, he says, V'lo shomer, they didn't listen to me. V'lo hitu es oznom. What a phrase. Lo shomer was sometimes you overhear something. You didn't mean to hear it, or you weren't concentrating, but sometimes you hear something. A snatch of conversation, something on the radio, a piece of news. That's shomu. Hitu es oznom is to pay attention. So he said the Jewish people didn't either. They never paid attention to me, and they didn't even hear the snatch of conversation from me. They didn't even hear the noise. They missed the whole point. They went in their own ideas, right? Everybody is smarter than God, right? They went their own way. They have their own guarantee of how to do it. They were dominated by the wildness, by the stubbornness of their evil hearts. So shrirus means, we would say today, it's a noun rather that means something that's counterproductive. It's a self-destructive stubbornness. When you know it doesn't work and it's no good anymore and it's bankrupt, and you still go that way. That's shrirus libi. That's the stubbornness of my heart. I'm going to prove that I'm right, no matter what. It's a very good description of the Jewish people, much of the Jewish people in our time, when everything is bankrupted already, so one would think that we would realize we would come to our senses a little and follow the same idiocy again. They have become the back, the bottom, and not the front, not the head. They've lost out on everything. Now, here's a review. The Navi says, from the day that your forefathers left Egypt till today, I sent to you prophets on a regular basis. Jewish people were not without prophecy for the entire period of time, almost 1,000 years, never without prophets. And the prophets all told them the same thing. Yom hashke v'shaloach. Every day we got up, so to speak, and I sent you a prophet. Every day. Every day there was somebody that told you the truth. They didn't hear to me. They didn't care. They didn't pay attention. They were stiff-necked people. They hardened their necks. And they were worse than their forefathers. Instead of becoming better, they became worse. And here you have also an historical fact, and that is that the first generation that goes away from Torah, so they still have a connection. The second generation, the third, the fourth, but you reach a point where there's no connection whatsoever. And they are worse, therefore, because they really have no connection anymore to their roots. Part of our terrible problem in Eretz Yisrael is the fact that you have now fourth or the fifth generation that's raised in secular humanism. It's raised on atheism and on Marx, and that's it. It's bankrupted. You have there's no connection. You have no. People say it's polarized. There's no safam shutefet. There's no common language. That's right. There is no common language. But whose fault is that? Who is moved? Why is there no common language? And that's what the Navi says. Hey, Reyu me'avosam. They're worse than their forefathers. V'dibarto aleim es kol advorim ha'eleh. So if you say all of these words to them, you tell them the whole story, they won't listen to you. Oh, we heard it already. Old story. But then again, the prophet again, that nudnik, he's coming to bother us again. We know it all already. The koroso aleim, you will call on to them to return, velo yanucha, they will not even answer you. Therefore, it's as though the Navi says, it's a waste of time. So God has to, so to speak, do something else to gain our attention, to prove it to us, which is, again, the long story of the Jewish people, that there always are terrible things that serve to point out the bankruptcy of assimilation, the bankruptcy of trying to escape being Jewish. Again, we are not very good students of history. One would think there's the drive on now, the 50th anniversary, so to speak, of Kristallnacht. But to a great extent, much of what happened in the last 50 years is absolutely wasted on many Jews because it makes no impression. Unaware. So they won't even answer you. And you will say to them, what is the description of the Jewish people? The people who never listened to the Lord, to their God. They never learned a lesson. They never understood what the Torah wanted from them. They have lost faith. It is cut from their mouths, meaning that there is no truth. They don't even know how to speak like Jews. They don't know how to talk like Jews. They don't even know how to go through the motions. So now the Navi says, is there any wonder that the Churban is coming? Is there any wonder that there is no hope for them, for their future? How else can it be? He speaks to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are always represented in the feminine gender. The Bom Shalom Kaviyachal is the male, and the Jewish people are the female. So God tells them, Gozi means to shave your head. Mizrach, your crown of glory. So either it refers to the woman's hair, which was her crown of glory, or it means to remove the crown. But you shave yourself bald, and throw it away. because your days of glory are over. It was always a sign of mourning. Si'i usi'i al shvoyim kino, and go up to the mountains. Shvoyim are hills, mountains, and there recite an elegy, a kina. There you will mourn. Forshim always say that why does the Navi always say go on the hills? Because the hills are the place where the Jewish people worship idols. So the Navi in effect is saying, if you want to see what happened to the Jewish people, if you want to see why the destruction is here, just go up and take a look, and you will see clearly why the destruction of the Jewish people is not only obvious, there's almost no way out of it. Kimoas Hashem, they have despised God. Vayitosh Esdor Evrosa. Vayitosh, the Rabboni Shalom. Look at the way the Navi says, God has forsaken us. And therefore, this is the generation that will bear the brunt of God's anger. This is based on many, many different thoughts in Judaism, but there's like a generation that suffers for everything that happened before. So no one can understand God's system of justice, but there's no question that the punishment that befell the Jewish people in our time was not the punishment for that generation alone. It's a cumulative effect. And the Meforshim say that what happens is that God removes his protection from the Jewish people. Once that happens, the world would destroy us in an instant, at any time. The only thing is that there is always the hand of God's protection that allows us to survive. But if it is removed for an instant, in that instant the worst of things can happen, as they have. In that instant, then everything can be said. That's Dor Evroso, the generation that suffers God's anger. Ki osu b'nei Yehuda hara b'einayim Hashem. The children of Yehuda, the 10 tribes, are already gone at this time. The Navi is speaking only about the kingdom of Judah. So ki osu b'nei Yehuda hara b'einayim Hashem. They have done what is evil in my eyes. What have they done? Somu shikutzeim babayus asher nikra shmi olav latamo. My house, meaning the temple, there they have placed their abominations, and they have profaned it. Here we have a long essay written by many of the Meforshim, that here we're talking not only about the fact that in the time of the first temple, Jews worshipped idolatry in the temple itself, which is not hard to imagine, because we have Jewish places in the world that are dedicated to the destruction of Judaism today. And the Navi says that the Navi Yechezkel tells us that there were 25 men that came into the temple, and they bowed with their backs to God, so to speak, to the temple, and they bowed to the sun in the east, in the temple courtyard. You have all sorts of Jews, as you always have had. We can see it today happening also. There's a book called A Century of Ambivalence, written by a man called Gittleman. It's the pictorial history of the last 100 years of the Jews in Russia. Absolutely fascinating book. And has photographs that I really don't know where he got them from. He collected them, remarkable photographs. So he has there a photograph of the Jewish Communist Party in Russia in the early 1920s, had a theater, a Yiddish theater. With all the nostalgia for the Yiddish theater was one of the most destructive things in the history of the Jewish people. It was the vehicle for all ridicule of everything that was Jewish. So in this theater, they had a play. And in the play, he has a picture there of three of the actors who are kneeling, and on their backside is written in Hebrew the word kosher. Kof Shin Resh. So, I mean, if Streicher did that, or the Arab propagandists or anything, the ADL would go crazy. And here, the Jews did it. And there are things that go on. If you see the Israeli newspapers sometimes, I mean, now they're all going to have a fit because the religious parties, instead of disappearing, became much stronger. Which, it just drives them up a wall. But if you see the cartoons that appear, the cartoons are, there's no newspaper in the world that would dare print a cartoon like that portray a Jew, with the long beard and the hook nose. I mean, it's Mamish Streicher. It's their Stormer. But Jews can do that. It's within us to do that. So that's what the Navi says. In my own Beis Hamikdash, God says, in my own house, they came and they worshipped idols. So what do you want from me, God says? What do you want? What should I do about it? So the only thing I can do is at least kick them out of the house. Close the house. That's it. And the Navi Yeshayahu says it in this famous first chapter. He said, who asked you to come? Who needs you? Like, stay home. Right, so we have, the gay synagogue in New York. You have this synagogue in New York. You have that synagogue in New York. Who needs it? Right? So don't, it's a free country. You can do whatever you want, right? But don't make a show out of it. You to do that? Who told you to make those travesties? And that's been the complaint always against the non-Jewish Jews who constantly tear down the Jewish people, and who tear down themselves, but they don't realize that, that we're all in the same boat, and if you make a hole under your seat, then the whole boat is going to sink. See, people say, what's the difference? I'm entitled to do what I want. Yeah, you're not entitled. They have built for themselves altars in the valley of Ben Hinnom. That's the word Gehenom. Gehenom, which means the Jewish word for hell. The Lithuanian Jew who never wanted to pronounce hell said he would spell it H-E-L-L. So, Gay Ben Hinnom, in the valley of Ben Hinnom. Why is that Gehenom? Because in that valley they had this idol Tophes and Molech. Those were the two idols. And those idols, the worship of the idols was to burn children alive to the idol. So to us, it's barbarism without compare, right? But that was the style, and you know what fashion is, you know what style is. People will do anything with fashion or style. Anything. And therefore that was the style. So you had Jewish children that were burned to death by Jewish parents to these idols. So God says, you have built these altars in Ben Hinnom, Lisrof es B'neihem Vesperoseim Bo'esh, to burn their children in the fire. Yeah, and that's good. And then you come tomorrow to bring me a sacrifice in the temple, and you expect that, the score will be even. Asher lo tzivisi, I never commanded it. Lo also alibi, Rabboni Shalom says, I never imagined, God talks as a human being almost, Kaviyachali. I never imagined such an abomination. That's service of a God. That's how you worship a God. That's how you worship it. That's how you show. It's just unspeakable. So in the entire history of the world, the Greek world, the Roman world, the Buddhist world, even in the Arab world, it's accepted that human beings are sacrificed. And it was just unbelievable. So God says, I cannot even imagine it. How you could do such a thing. Well, also I'll leave it. It's beyond my imagination. It's beyond my ability to come to any peace with it. Therefore God says, this is a phrase that's used for good and it's used otherwise also. There are processes in history, so to speak. The days are coming by themselves. God says, you've unleashed the process. I will not reverse it. So in the end of days, it says also that days are coming, days of goodness and of restoration. So again, it has nothing to do with us, right? Once the process is unleashed, so God will not abort it in the middle. But here it's the negative process that's unleashed. There are days coming, they will not be called anymore by the fancy names that you call them. You call them Tofes and Gay Ben Hinom. Right? Those are nice names by you. They're fashionable. And you'll be remembered for something else. The enemies will take you and your children down in that valley and slaughter you, the Navi says, which is what happened in the time of the Babylonians. That tens of thousands of Jews were slaughtered in the valley, massacred. That's what you'll remember it for. Ki Gei HaHarego, it will be called the Valley of the Massacre. The Kovru Betofes, they will try to bury as many as they can. Mei Mokum, and there won't be enough space. There won't be any burial space. The bodies will rot. And they'll bury them even in the Tofes, even where the idols were. They'll have to use that to bury them. So here is really a description of what happened to us in our generation 50, 40 years ago. There's a BBC documentary on the Holocaust that I show in the yeshiva every 2-3 years. So it's the most powerful documentary that exists because of the actual photos that the British Army took. The British Army freed Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald and a few of the terrible camps. They got in there first before it was sanitized. So they have a picture there that just is beyond description of bulldozers burying corpses. Thousands of corpses being buried by bulldozers that have to... There's no other way to do it. So that's the memory of it. That's what it will be called, the Navi says, the valley of massacre, the valley of death, the valley of destruction. The corpses of the people, they will be the food, the fodder for the birds of heaven and the animals of the earth. They macharid, and nobody will frighten them off. Animals usually are frightened. The jackals, the scavengers. So if anybody is alive, anybody hollers, shoots, so then they flee, they run. There will be nobody that will frighten them. No human being will be left. So either it means no one will care, or there won't be anyone living left. But in any event, it's a description of a terrible, terrible time. So again, we would think that it's an exaggeration, except that we have lived through it and have seen that it's an understatement. It's not an exaggeration. Here the Navi reverses the song of joy. He said, no longer will be heard. I shall silence. I shall end. That in the cities of Yehuda and in the streets of Jerusalem there will be kol soson v'kol simcha, kol choson v'kol chala. That will not be heard anymore. There will be no sounds of rejoicing, no choson, no kala, nothing. It will all be gone. Ki l'chorva ti haaretz. And the earth will be destroyed. Desolate, destroyed, left alone. V'isahinu Hashem. At this time, God says, V'yotziu es atzmos malchei Yehuda, ves atzmos Sora, ves atzmos HaKohanim, ves atzmos HaNeviim, ves atzmos Yoshei Yishalayim Mikivreim. He said the dead won't find rest. You go all over Europe today, there's almost not a Jewish cemetery left whole. It's not just the living. In Poland, it's Judenrein. I have a friend of mine who I know very well, a Polish Jew. He told me he just came back from his town. He paid the Polish mayor $5,000 American to keep the cemetery. He bribed them. Otherwise, it's a park. Otherwise, it's a ball field. It's a soccer field. The Jewish cemetery in Vilna is a soccer field today. It's a stadium. The Jewish cemetery in Przeworsk in Bratislava in Czechoslovakia is a clover leaf for a highway. Some Sefer is buried underneath. Only 2 graves they left. Underneath the bridge of the clover leaf says the Some Sefer and the son, the tzav Sefer. Only 2 graves are left. Oh, cemeteries are gone. There's nobody left. God says that. The Navi says, right? That even those that are dead have nowhere to escape. They won't let you. What are you talking about? They tried a number of times to take bodies of great people out, and they can't get permission either from the Russian government or the Polish government. And again, as you see, it's a game of extortion, right? Because if you'll pay, right? Let's say they go in the Vilna, they rebury the Gaon of Vilna in a different cemetery. They move the Gaon and the shaft. There are 3/4 of graves that they moved. Rabbi Teitz was able to do it. So they propositioned that, they would let them take him to Eretz Yisrael, let them take him out, but they wanted like $100,000 or $200,000, whatever. So you're not allowed to play that game. That's historic extortion. It's always been like that. The Maram Rottenberg, the Rebbe of the Rosh, died in prison, and they wouldn't give out his bodies, and the Jews let it be there for 13 years. They wouldn't pay the ransom because they knew that would always happen that way. And then finally, there was a wealthy man who did ransom the body for a much more modest sum than the original request, and he did so on the condition that he would be allowed to be buried next to the Maram Rottenberg. They're buried in the Jewish cemetery in Worms. It's the oldest Jewish cemetery in Europe that still remains in the French Rhineland. So the Maram is buried there, and the man who ransomed him. But for 13 years, they didn't take him. They wouldn't pay the price. Because, again, once you give in, so then there's no end. I mean, you don't think the Chassidim would ransom all the Rebbes if they could? They certainly would. And the Rabbonim and everybody would do it, but you can't do that. You just can't do that. So, but it's all destroyed. So he writes that the bones will be dug up, which is what happened, right? They dug up the cemetery. So there are bones all over the cemetery. The Navi says that God got even, so to speak. They love to worship the sun and the moon and the stars, so now they're exposed to the sun and the moon and the stars. Those are the idols that they worshipped and that they followed. And they searched for them, and they had a problem. So then you go to the astrologer, right? You go to the soothsayer. You go to the stargazer. So God, so to speak, says, that's the measure for measure, right? That's the way you wanted it, and that's the way you have it. Right? Let Marx save you. Go to the International Socialist Convention. Let them save you. What do you want from me? A very bitter chapter here. But it's one of the most realistic haftorahs because of the fact that it puts it's not history, it's current events. The haftorah is today's newspaper. You want to know what's happening here? You want it, that's what you got, right? And you worship them. They will not again be gathered. Lo yikaveru, they will not be buried. L'domen al pnei Adam it'll be fertilizer, it'll be ashes. It has no value. Even today, in many of the places in Europe where hundreds of thousands of people were buried and burned, etc., so it still is the richest soil in Europe because of the high content of minerals which exist in the ground. And that's what the Navi says. See, that's what you'll be good for. Nivchar moves mechayim. And those that survive would rather be dead than alive. The rest of the family. Those that survived, if they could, they would choose death over life. And in all of the places where I have pushed them away, they've been pushed away in all of the places of their dispersion, not to return. Now, the concluding verses of the Navi are not part of the chapter. We don't want to end on such a depressing note. So they probably didn't have to worry about it because they didn't know that people wouldn't pay attention to the Haftorah. So we have a rule that we never end on a depressing note. That's why the sermon is in the middle of the service. So here we have three of the most famous psukim from the Novi Yirmiyahu, which we read on Yom Kippur. They are the concluding verses of the Haftorah on Yom Kippurim in the morning. And these are the verses that really sum up what a human being is supposed to be. The Navi and his greatness. Ko Amar Hashem, thus says the Rabbanu Shalom. Al Yishalel Chacham B'Chachmaso. Let no man praise himself, no wise man praise himself because of his wisdom. Let that not be the source of your pride. And the Meforshim explain here, wisdom, intelligence, that's a gift of God. All of these things are a gift of God. A person has a beautiful voice, so you didn't do anything for it. All of the talents and attributes that we have that build our ego, so those are gifts that the Rabbanu Shalom has given us. And therefore, you cannot praise yourself for receiving a gift because you didn't earn it. You didn't buy it. You didn't earn it. It's a gift. It's serendipity. It's good luck. It happens. So let not the wise man praise himself on his wisdom. There are people who are blessed with photographic memories, with great minds, with high IQs. It's a gift. Like people who can hit a baseball, like people who can play 20 games of chess at one time. But that's not the source of praise. That's not the ultimate praise. The reason why is because of what do you do with the gift? That's the measure. The person that designed the gas chambers also used his brains. It was very efficient. It was built very well. All the weapons of war and destruction, everything that exists in the world are also made by wise men. They're not made by fools. They're not made by people who are incompetent, who don't understand how to do something correctly. So wisdom itself is not the source of praise. It's what one does with the wisdom. And let not the courageous, strong man praise himself because of his strength. Let him not say words of praise because of the fact that he is a gibor. He is strong. It depends what he's strong for. Depends how he uses his might. Depends how he uses his will. Depends where he measures his strength. It is not a Again, it's a gift. It's not him. It's a gift that's given to him. Ve'al yishalel osher b'yoshro, which is, the Meforshim say, the hardest of all. Right? The wise man, the wealthy man should not praise himself for his wealth, because the nature of a person who acquires wealth is that he's convinced that he did it, and he forgets, even if he knew at one time that he didn't do it, he convinces himself that he did do it. I have somebody here in Shul that always tells me the story how he became a great financier. Is that the first day he was a stockbroker in the office, and he was very nervous. It was his first day, and somebody called up, and it's a big tumult in the office. It was a heavy day, and they were buying and selling, and somebody said, buy 50,000 shares of GM. And he, in his nervousness, bought 50,000 shares of GE. And GE went up 6 or 7 points, and GM didn't. So they said, what a genius, right, this guy. Right? He made $300,000-$400,000 for the customer because he knew what he was doing, right? And it was pure accident. It was an error. But when you make an error and you make $300,000-$400,000 in 10 minutes, so the next day he was an expert already. And over the period of time, you begin to believe it. You did it. And many, many times the product of having a fortune is the product of having good fortune, right? You just, just happened that way. And many times people who really should do very well, for some reason, don't. So the Navi says, you cannot praise yourself for wealth either. It's also a gift. Why God gives certain people wealth and he doesn't give it to me? So that's Tevye already asked that question, right? It's an old question. But that it's a gift. Most people realize, at least most people who don't have wealth realize that it's a gift. And that it's not necessarily talent or great genius that brings it about. And there's Balzac's famous phrase that behind every great fortune is a great crime, which also has an element of truth to it. A great story about a gift that fits the Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, who was the Rav in Yerushalayim in the 1920s, the Rav of the Yeshiva Yosham. So Thomas Masaryk, who was then the president of Czechoslovakia between the wars, and who was a very good person. And he was good to the Jewish people, but he was a good person in a bad world. So he visited Eretz Yisrael, he visited Palestine at the time. And because the Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld came from a town that was then in Czechoslovakia, and because the Czechoslovakian Jews helped support that group in Yerushalayim, so the president of Czechoslovakia arranged a meeting with the rabbi, with Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. So when he saw him, so Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld was a very imposing, handsome figure. The only picture that we have of him is with the Czech president, who wanted a picture taken. And then the Jews clipped out Masaryk from the picture, so that's the picture of Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. But in the original picture, the president of Czechoslovakia appears. So in any event, he said to him, he saw that he was a very old man. So he said to him, Herr Rabbiner, he said, don't be angry at me, but may I ask you, how old are you? So Yosef Chaim told him, he said, I don't know. Mr. President, he said, I don't know how old I am. He said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, I don't know records when you were born in Czechoslovakia, how old you are. So he said to him as follows. He said, listen, he said, if you're in business, and somebody comes into your store and he wants to buy an item, so you say, okay, this item is $45, and the man hands you cash. So before you give him the item, you count the $45 to make sure that he paid you, and then you give him the item. He said, but if somebody comes to you and he says, I'm giving you a gift, and he gives you an envelope full of cash, he said, it is not courtesy to open the envelope in front of the person and to count out the money that he gave you in front of him. He gave you a gift. He said, all the years of my life from God are a gift, he says. Therefore, he said, I don't know how old I am. I've never counted it in front of him. It's all a gift. And that idea of something being a gift, that's what the Navi says here. The Navi says there's nothing to be proud of in the fact that you have been given a gift, that you've been given talent, whether it be wisdom or strength or wealth. But there is something that you can be proud of. There is something that you can praise yourself, that you can say, look how great I am. Haskel v'yodoa osi. If you use the gifts to know me, to have a relationship with me, then you can be proud of what I have given you. Then you have used the talents, the life that I have given you, you've used them for my purpose. Ki ani Hashem oseh chesed mishpat u'tzedakah ba'aretz. When you realize that I am God, who does righteousness and justice and charity and goodness in the world, that I'm the source of all of that, and you want to imitate me, that's the great idea of Judaism, is that we are imitators of the Rabboni Shalom, so to speak. All of the mitzvahs that we have, the social mitzvahs, the mitzvahs between man and his fellow man, are imitation of how God is. These are the things that I desire. I desire chesed and mishpat and tzedakah. If you are wise enough to discern that, to see behind the candy, so to speak, to see that what I want more from you, what I really hope you'll be, so then Kim Bezosius Halel Hamishalel. So then there is room to be proud of yourself. Then there's room to stand up and say, look how great I am. The Fortune point out that a person that reaches that level will never stand up and say how great I am. A person that understands, so to speak, God and the relationship to him is automatically a humble person. That's why it says, Moshe Onav Mod. Moshe was the most humble of all people. Because Moshe was the greatest, therefore he was the most humble. And arrogance is not found where great righteousness is found. They are mutually exclusive. So it's almost academic here. It's almost theoretical. You'll be able to praise yourself. But the greatness is that you won't praise yourself because you realize who I am and what your relationship to me is, and in that you'll find your fulfillment and greatness itself.